Hello and welcome to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends. Today is Thursday, March the 26th of 2015, and I am your host, Leon Wolf. Let me begin by introducing, as I always do, my regular panel of co-hosts. We're delighted, as always, to be joined by Scott Lincicome of the Cato Institute, Neal of the Federalist, Jeff Blehar, our newest regular panelist of the Ace of Spades Decision Desk, and F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon. Despite what it says behind him, he does not, in fact, write for the Daily Caller. So we're glad to have Bill with us. Our guest host for this week is Kemberlee Kaye, who is a contributing editor for Legal Insurrection, and we are glad to have her with us as our guest host. Kemberlee, by tradition, the first question goes to the guest, so you're up first, and we'll get right to it. The big news of the week in the conservative blogosphere and Twitter world, of course, is the campaign of Ted Cruz, the first official candidate on either side of the aisle. Ted Cruz announced that he would be running for president this week, surprising no one, and yet making the first official candidate of the race. Cruz is, of course, an interesting figure that kicks up a lot of dust on both sides of the aisle. He is controversial. No one seems to have only a mild opinion or no opinion of him. People have strong opinions on both sides. And one of the things that people say about Ted, Kemberlee, is that, a question that Ted Cruz is going to have to answer is this question about experience. And it's not so much a question of how he's going to be as a candidate, but whether he'll be able to be successful as a president if he runs and wins. And Bergdahl wrote a piece at Red State which argued that Obama has been a tremendously successful president, at least in terms of advancing the liberal agenda, despite an almost total lack of experience on his part. He's been able to get things done in terms of moving the ball forward on health care, on a lot of other issues, with a total disregard of Congress. He's aided, of course, in that by a spineless Republican Congress that we have right now. I guess the question I have for you is, how much does experience matter for Ted Cruz as a candidate and also as a president? Does it make a difference coming at this from a conservative side, from a guy to have experience as opposed to what Obama had? All right, Kemberlee, I can't hear you, unfortunately. So I'm going to turn that same exact question over to Jeff. We'll try to get Kemberlee's microphone issues worked out. Jeff, what do you think?
Well, I think it matters. I think it matters for the same reason that Obama's lack of experience mattered. You know, he came into the Senate and he came into the Senate. He didn't have much time prior to that, and then he went into the presidency without any experience in doing much except winning elections. Ted Cruz has, on paper, provided we set aside whatever reservations we might have with his personality or with the way he gets things done, he has the correct positions on things. But he doesn't have anything resembling either experience in politics, and, more importantly, he doesn't have anything resembling a track record of any kind of success, legislatively or in any other form. And I find that to be a big problem, especially when we're talking about potential presidential candidates. Now, the one thing that is worth pointing out, and every time you get into an argument with somebody about Ted Cruz, who's a fan of Ted Cruz, is they insist, well, he was such a great lawyer, he's such a great attorney. Stipulated. He's one of the smartest people I think you're ever going to see, one of the smartest people you'll find in Washington, D.C. Fantastic record of accomplishment in the private sector and in the public sector working for the state as an attorney. But I don't really see how that translates to political skill, except for the fact that he can make a rhetorically deft argument that nevertheless sometimes happens to fall upon deaf ears.
So I have to take issue with that, at least to some degree, and I'm going to turn for this next question to Neal, who wrote a post that's going to be the subject of some discussion tonight.
Sure.
Both that characterization and what you wrote at the Federalist, which was essentially that Ted Cruz's experience to this point is almost exactly the same as what Obama's was to this point. And it's not just, and I object to the characterization, Ted Cruz would not be my first choice for president for a lot of reasons, but it isn't just that Ted Cruz was a lawyer before he became a senator. I mean, the guy was the director of policy and planning for the FTC. He was the associate deputy attorney general for the DOJ. He was a solicitor general of Texas for 5 years. Those are supervisory positions. I mean, they are not, I'm a lawyer and I go and I argue cases and I write briefs. He had substantial responsibility and he was in charge of actual staffs of people. and their positions with not inconsiderable responsibility. So he may not have been a governor, which I would have preferred, but he clearly has serious management and professional experience, I think at least on par with managing a Senate staff for an equivalent number of years, which Obama could not claim as a guy who came from a state representative chamber, which for many people who may not know, I mean, they essentially share a pool of staff that they don't even supervise in most state legislatures. I mean, wouldn't you admit that on the experience front, really Cruz is more qualified than Obama was at this time?
No, I don't think I would admit that. I think that Cruz is just as qualified as Barack Obama was. And I think in my article, I did make explicit reference to the fact that, at least in Cruz's state-level position, he far outshone Barack Obama in terms of his actual performance. You know, the point of the article wasn't necessarily to make an actual substantive critique of the guy, because that would take a lot more words, a much longer listicle. But the point was to raise some interesting similarities, some superficialities, if you will, that nevertheless the mind naturally turns toward when considering the man as he embarks upon his run for the White House. So while the similarities are in no way you know, a fatal critique of Cruz, they are something that I think people naturally will consider. And like it or not, we have to either refute those or contextualize those, because most people aren't going to go beyond the surface level. They're not going to get beyond superficialities. Ted Cruz, and this was another main point of my piece, Barack Obama is intensely disliked, but he has gotten to this level of dislike after 6 years of being president. Now, Ted Cruz starts with a substantial portion of the population, not just the general electorate, but among the GOP, who intensely dislike him on style, on strategy, on tactics, just maybe because his voice is annoying. So he starts at this deficit that Barack Obama really only achieved after 6 years of screwing over the country repeatedly. So there's some real challenges that I raised in the piece, but it is mostly focused on that initial first glance at the candidate.
And I agree, Neal, that look, nobody more than me believes that Ted Cruz has some problems that he has to overcome, some very substantial hurdles that he has to overcome before he even gets the nomination. But, you know, at least on the experience front, and I agree there's superficial similarities, but I think that once you get down below that, that's really kind of where the similarities end. And I want to move over. Do we have Kemberlee? Can we hear you now? Still no. Okay, so let's go to Bill as we continue to work on her microphone issues. Bill, Kevin Williamson at NR had a piece where he chronicled a lengthy series of articles from the period of 1976 to about 1980, and they had all these hilarious headlines essentially proclaiming that you know, Ronald Reagan can never win. You know, GOP insiders say that Ronald Reagan can never win. Gerald Ford people saying Ronald Reagan could never win, that he could never win a general election. So, Bill, I want you to imagine a world in which Ted Cruz gets the nomination. Do you share Williamson's belief that he would have a reasonable shot of winning in the general once he gets a chance to be on camera, to be on television, and make his case directly to the American public without a media filter?
I absolutely think whoever we put out there will be able to make a case to win the presidency. I think the electorate and what we've seen from the Obama administration and what we've seen from Hillary as a campaigner actually is going to make Cruz a viable candidate. I don't think there will be a better time for Ted Cruz to run for president, just because of the negative climate for Democrats right now. So I actually completely understand why Ted Cruz is jumping at this opportunity right now, the same way I understand why the water was perfect for Barack Obama to make his insurgent run in 2008. So in regards to Neal's point that that Cruz is just a new Obama. I actually think the scenarios of a presidency that is deeply unpopular, I think that's actually the clearest parallel between these two. Not just the inexperience, the situation in which they are running and jumping in and finding themselves viable, I think is actually the most solid parallel you can find between Obama and Ted Cruz.
Hey, Bill, I want to just jump in here for a second. I was actually talking with Neal and some other people about this last night, talking about the rationale for a Ted Cruz candidacy. And the observation that I came up with, I don't know if you agree with me or if anybody else does, please feel free to jump in and tell me I'm an idiot, is that it reminds me a lot of Mike Huckabee's candidacy in 2008, and that it had an interesting initial rationale in a primary, but no real well-planned-out endgame. It was sort of like get in, see what happens, roll the dice, maybe we get lucky. I understand why Cruz is getting it. It makes sense. As you said, and this is what triggered this in my mind, that this is the time for him to run. He's never going to have a better shot than he does right now, right? But as he gets in right now, he has one sector of the primary field all to himself, which is the very conservative, like true believer, base activist types. He gets those people. Nobody else really can compete for them the way that he can. Fine. So he's going to have like a hardcore group that will follow him for the first initial stages of any primary campaign. But what happens after more and more people drop out? Marco Rubio leaves the field. Huckabee, Ted, Rick Perry, all these secondary candidates fall out. Where do their voters go? Do their voters ever realistically ever go to Ted Cruz? No, in the same way that their voters weren't ever going to go to Mike Huckabee in 2008. So he has a way to do well in the early stages when it's like a 10-man free-for-all, but he doesn't seem to have any plausible path to the primary nomination in my mind, and it just feels to me like he's striking now because he's saying, well, it's either now or never. I don't want to get Chris Christie. Like Christie should have run in 2012 because he's a secondary. He's an afterthought now. But I don't see how he gets to where he's trying to go with his candidacy, right, from where I stand right now.
So that's a good segue to the next question, which I'm going to throw to Scott, because Essie Cupp had an interesting piece in the New York Daily News where she talked about Ted Cruz and his appeal to, I guess, the conservative base. And I think that whatever it is that you feel about Cruz's tactics, this is what she said, his willingness to be, quote-unquote, unreasonable in the face of everyone essentially telling him to sit down and shut the hell up fits the zeitgeist of the modern GOP primary voter, doesn't it? I mean, they're sick of being told you guys are unreasonable, you just need to calm down and wait and let these tactics play out. I mean, isn't that really where the GOP primary electorate is at? And if so, do you think that's going to be enough to catapult him into serious contention? Or do you agree with Jeff and Neal that he's doomed to be down around the 5% mark throughout this campaign?
Well, I will never fully agree with Jeff and Neal. Let's put that first. But beyond that, I don't really agree with you to the extent that he is really the id or the representation of the current GOP primary voter. GOP primary voters were pretty darn ticked off in 2012, and they gave us Willard Mitt Romney. So I don't think they're any more ticked off today than they were just a few years ago. Beyond that, I think that he has a problem with simply credibility beyond the base, and I think with GOP primary voters. I think with people who aren't ideologically predisposed to disliking Ted, but are turned off by some of his past antics, and I don't know are willing to give him a shot in the primary. And so I don't really think that I don't think that he has no chance, but I do think it's going to be a very, very tough road to hoe in both the primary and the general. He strikes me as a guy that has very high unfavorables and the inability to change those unfavorables over the next 16 months. And I'm not saying that's fair. I just think that's kind of where things are.
You did agree with me, by the way. I just want to point that out, that you did.
No, I philosophically I didn't. Maybe just on the surface.
You resist, but eventually you will be assimilated.
Okay. Kemberlee, can we hear you now? Are you there? Still nothing. So puzzling. Technical difficulties still going on. So Bill, let's go back to you. JPod wrote an article that said essentially the challenge for Cruz is this. What is Cruz's stump speech, right? Everybody else who gets on the stage, Scott Walker can say, when I was governor of Milwaukee, I did X, Y, Z, and I defeated A, B, and C. Jeb Bush, likewise, can point to, I did A, B, C, X, Y, and Z. Many of the guys in the field have essentially a resume that they can run on. What does Ted Cruz point to as an actual accomplishment, a thing that he has done that is his way of saying, look, if I'm elected president, I can get things done? Because even on the things, and this is legitimate criticism to me, even on the things that he stood up for and made himself a hero on by standing up to the GOP establishment or whatever it is, he ultimately ended up getting run over in each of those cases. So what does he offer as a stump speech to the voters for why they should pick him as a guy who can be a successful president?
Cruz's entire candidacy is going to be based on philosophy, if we can use that term liberally. He's going to say, yes, I got run over because there is an establishment, but that's why you need me out there, because they won't be able to run me over. The second I am president, they can no longer ignore me. So I think his stump speech is going to be, don't let the establishment ignore you anymore. Your concerns on immigration, I hear you, I feel you, I agree with you. It's going to be another silent majority type campaign where he just makes the point that you guys are currently being represented by people who do not represent your views. I represent your views, and I will be able to execute them only if you elevate me from the Senate to the actual presidency. And in that regard, once again, another throwback to Obama's initial pitch about himself. I agree with Joy about his prospects. They don't actually look too great or too promising. But I think that's going to be his stump speech, is nobody actually represents you except for me, and I will actually be able to, even though I haven't been able to project a record of accomplishment yet, just put me in office and then I'll start accomplishing. I think that's going to be what he ends up doing.
And let me add, I think that regardless of whether Cruz does or can win, he's going to play a great, really valuable role in the primary process as the teller of hard truths and really a champion of legitimately fiscally conservative ideas. I mean, ethanol is a perfect example where he went to Iowa and did his sister told you routine to a bunch of corn farmers and basically said, yeah, I do not support the renewable fuel standard. And I don't support wind subsidy credits. And he actually got a pretty decent response there with that. And so, I think he's going to have a problem building an electoral coalition being the teller of hard truths. But it's going to be a fantastic and valuable thing for the primary, as he's going to force some of the squishier candidates to move right and some of the more conservative candidates to really have a come-to-Jesus moment with whether they're going to squish out or stick to their principled guns. And in that alone, regardless of whether he wins, I welcome Ted Cruz in this race.
I actually just want to jump in and second exactly what Scott said.
Damn it!
I know, Scott, you and I, we're brothers from another mother. I think it's time that we just accepted this. But the point here is that I sometimes wish that the candidates whom I favor, people like Scott Walker, who has made a number of kind of rookie missteps lately, or Marco Rubio, I wish that they had the sort of courage that Cruz had. I think the big mistake that they make is they go into a place like Iowa, they think, I got to win this state, I've got to pander. If Scott Walker had come in there and said, ethanol subsidies are a bunch of bunkum, they shouldn't be here, yeah, maybe that might have hurt his ability to win the state in the general election, but I'm not even so sure about that. But it not only would have delivered it to him in the primary, or at least gone a long way towards that, but it would have invigorated people who were voting in all sorts of other primaries across the board. And I just wish you could put a lot of Ted Cruz's intellect and his balls, to be perfectly frank. You know, a lot of his ideological guts into other candidates, and it's a shame that the only person who has a lot of the right positions, in my opinion, is otherwise such a flawed messenger.
Well, and this is what I don't understand. I mean, I think that what you guys have both said is true. I mean, and I'm not a Ted Cruz guy for president. I'm not going to go put the Cruz 2016 bumper sticker on my car, but I do think that he has got valuable things to say for the reasons that Scott has said, and I don't like the kind of casual disrespect that's shown to him a lot of times by people who I think know that ultimately he's not going to win the nomination. Allow the man to say what it is he's going to say. Have somebody who goes to Iowa and say, you know, I oppose the renewable fuel standard. He'll be that guy on stage all the time, and I think that it's good for the GOP to have that guy standing there.
Casual disrespect, Leon, I mean, that's something that Cruz is going to have to get used to if he wants to be president. It's not casual. It's a measured assessment of the man and his abilities. He is an extremely talented, extremely smart person. He could be one of the most powerful advocates for advancing the conservative movement in the Senate, where he could goad the leadership, where he could actually be a spur to conservative reforms in that body. But no, he's letting his personal ambition, which he's had tattooed on his forehead ever since he first entered the public sphere, cloud that, and deter him from where he would actually be useful. He is squandering his talents in service of vanity.
That's just. You've never met anyone who's actually been a United States senator. I mean, you don't get to that position without having the ambition that if 10 people tell you that you can run for president, you're going to do it. I mean,
yeah.
Okay, but
I've had 10 people tell me I can run for president. It's not hard if you have a political opinion.
Is that why you shaved, Neal?
Neal, is why I shaved, actually.
You're gearing up for a presidential.
I know I'm only 31, and so I'm constitutionally ineligible, but I figure if Ted Cruz is Canadian and can run, I can make a shot. But here's the thing. I really do believe that Ted Cruz has a role in the conservative movement. I just don't think it's in the White House. And I really don't appreciate the mischaracterization of people who don't get on the Cruz train immediately and who have reservations about the guy.
See, here's why you can't be trusted. You said cruise train instead of cruise ship. Like, what kind of judgment do you have if you're not even smart enough to...
I'm not quick on my feet, Neal.
Use the obvious metaphor.
With all respect, and I like you and you're a friend, but that's just absolute bullshit, okay? That's absolute bullshit. Nobody is saying that anybody who doesn't immediately get on the cruise, nobody who you talk with and who you and I interact with,
Leon,
you don't immediately get on the cruise.
Leon, give me credit for having interacted with people.
Hey, guys, Joy is trying to make a point. Joy,
Leon, that's a
made
lot.
several points. I've been very quiet and polite while...
All right, you know what? I'll shut up. Neal and I are doppelgangers. You talk, Neal.
Exactly.
I'm not on the cruise bandwagon. That's not what I'm saying.
I know you're not.
You're acting like it's a new and unusual thing that a guy who's a senator is running a message campaign.
Let me say something nice about you. You are a reasonable man, and you have, I would say, a dispassionate assessment and approach to the issues. But unfortunately, Leon, you are a rare exception in the world of political commentary and internet commentary, because a lot of the people who I interact with tend to immediately assume that because I don't like Cruz, I must like Jeff, or because I don't like Cruz, I must be a liberal, or something like that. There's no middle ground. There's no, well, who do you like? It's not reflective. It's entirely reactive.
Okay.
So you are an exception. Most people aren't.
Listen, for number one, I'm immune to your flattery. Number two, you're acting like it's a new and unusual thing. You're acting like two things are new and unusual, and they're not. They happen all the time. Number one is that people have committed and unreasonable supporters. Anybody who's ever run for president and won has those people. You have to have them to win. Number two, you're acting like it's a new and unusual thing that somebody runs for president, not for the purpose of actually becoming president, but to carry a specific message or to raise their individual profile. It happens all the damn time, and it's just
call me crazy, but I just think that's such a waste of the voters' time if you're not actually in it to win it. And let me add a further.
I'm not going to call you crazy. I'm going to call you effeminate, Neal. You're
Thank you.
holding up a martini shaker, waving your hands around, saying, "Call me crazy."
Call me crazy.
You sound like Joy.
Bill, have you ever seen a martini shaker in your life? That is a martini, not a martini shaker.
Well, he had a martini shaker before.
It's actually Lillet Blanc and gin. But look, that's probably not doing me any favors.
It's what, Neal?
Lillet Blanc and gin. Okay. Anyway,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Zero credibility.
I know, right?
You're the GOP primary.
The last actual point I want to try to make here, which is I'm extremely wary of cults of personality, and the entire reason behind that is because of my experience getting caught up in it in 2008 with Sarah Palin. So I'm once bitten, twice shy about Ted Cruz.
You know who else had cults of personality?
Hitler.
Barack Obama. Mitt Romney had a cult of personality. Everybody who's ever made any kind of note. Huh?
So what personality did Mitt Romney have?
He didn't have a personality. He had a cult of personality. They're different.
No, he had a cult of $300 million.
Hugh Hewitt was the master, the crypt keeper of the Mitt Romney cult of personality.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who remembers that. I'm glad I'm not the only one who remembers that. I think we have Kemberlee. Kemberlee, can we hear you now?
I hope so. Can you hear me? Is it
fantastic? All right, we have you on the line. All right, anything you'd like to add to the Ted Cruz fracas that's been going on? Just go ahead and jump right in.
Okay, there's a handful of things I want to add. One of them, starting from the very beginning, which is the idea that Obama has been successful. You could argue that he has been successful and he has gotten a handful of things accomplished, but how many of those were extra legal? So I don't know if we really want to use that as a basis for comparing what is successful and what's not, because I would really hope that whomever we're able to install in the White House next will not use extra legal means in order to be accomplished. To what Neal was saying, and I don't think if anyone's been paying attention to my thoughts on Twitter or elsewhere, it's not really a secret that Ted Cruz isn't my first pick for president, because I think he is fantastic at many things. I would love to see him maybe as an attorney general or Supreme Court someday, or even right where he is for a little bit longer. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that he's running for president, although I don't necessarily believe that he will walk out with the nomination either. In the 2012 Texas Senate primary, it's kind of right around the time I started blogging, I started writing about Ted Cruz when he was polling around 4% at the time. And it was a really crowded primary, about 10 people, including David Dewhurst. And Ted Cruz was leaps and bounds the best candidate in the whole stat. So yes, he did come from the bottom. He was polling around 4%. And a lot of people say, well, he's polling around 4% now. He already beat the establishment twice in the runoff and then, of course, in the general. But the difference is, and I think there's a key point here that no one has really touched on, at least not that I've seen, is that he's yet to meet a formidable opponent that's a Democrat. Because in that race, he was running against a no-name Democrat, some idiot, I can't remember the guy's name, that they tossed in because they had to have a candidate to put on the ballot. And the guy was a complete and total joke. And so I think there's many things that Cruz brings to the argument. I like that he does have the ability to get people riled up. He has the ability to convey his passion. He definitely is unique in these regards in terms of the people that he's able to speak to and the crew that he's able to, sick on other people. But all of that aside, I don't know that that's enough. At the end of the day, I really don't know that that's enough. And I touched on this a little bit. You guys feel free to jump in if you want. I touched on that just a little bit today, too. That even in the speech that he made Monday at Liberty University is very exclusionary, because he paints this whole picture of what he believes would be this beautiful conservatopia. And no one outside of a very limited portion of the conservative, not even the broader Republican base, but outside of that small sect of the Republican or conservative base, are going to want to buy into that. And so I think moving down the road, that's going to be a problem, That being said, though, I like that he's in the race because I like what he brings to it. I like that he brings the passion to all these kids and a lot of the grassroots folks and other people too. He appeals to a lot of people at the end of the day. Whether or not he's going to be able to utilize what he's able to do in a small faction to rope in other people is going to be the question, and I'm not so optimistic about that.
Well, let's move on. We've spent plenty of time on Ted Cruz, I think. Let's move on to our second topic of the night, and we're going to stay with Kemberlee now that we have her audio working, and let's talk a little bit about Bowe Bergdahl. Bowe Bergdahl, of course, was charged by the Army with desertion and misbehavior in front of the enemy, if I have that correct. 2 charges that collectively carry a possible life sentence for Mr. Bergdahl. I guess the question that I have about this, and as I watch people still defend the Obama administration and their actions with regard to the Bergdahl swap, is I can remember back to this point of the Bush presidency, okay, after the 2006 debacle where the Republicans in Congress had their clocks cleaned because of association with Bush. At this point of the Bush's presidency, there were precious few people who were still defending him at all costs. You had people who would defend him on the merits when he deserved it. But there were precious few people who would defend him no matter what he did. Yet still, even now, there are numerous people on the left, the Brian Butlers, Joan Walsh, Josh Marshall, plenty of people who are still to this day defending the president's decision to trade 5 high-profile prisoners for Bergdahl, even though it was obvious at the time to everyone that it was a bad deal. What, if anything, Kemberlee, could cause these people to remove their lips from Obama's backside regarding literally everything that he does? Are we going to see him reach the point that we got with Bush, where even a lot of conservatives turned on Bush to the end of his presidency, or is this just how it's going to be to the end?
I think once they have consolidated behind a nominee, I think then they'll start jumping ship. Until that happens, no. Because right now this is their bread and butter. That is their devout loyalty is to Barack Obama. Everything he says, everything he does. You can see the New York Times has turned on Hillary. The Associated Press, to a lesser degree, has also turned on Hillary. And so I think they're in a panic. They're in a panic right now. But I do think that once they kind of sort that out behind the scenes and they figure out who they're going to push out front, they will solidify around that individual, and then, yeah, Obama's going to get a good view of the undercarriage of that bus.
So, Scott, let's go to you. We haven't heard very much from you during the course of the program. I wrote a piece about this, if I may be so bold as to toot my own horn, about the Bergdahl swap. Mm-hmm. And I think that people are tending to fall on opposite ends of the spectrum, which are both incorrect. There are some people who say, listen, we should have paid literally any price to get Bowe Bergdahl back. But really, if you think about it, if they had asked for a nuclear weapon, we're not going to give Bowe Bergdahl back unless you give us a nuclear weapon, nobody would have said okay to that. And then there are some people who say, listen, we should have given literally nothing to get Bowe Bergdahl back. And I don't think that's correct either. I think that a guy who is an American soldier deserves at least some effort, at least a token effort to get him back. The question I have for you is there a price that you would have felt okay with the administration paying to get Bergdahl back? Or are you in the camp that just says, listen, the guy deserted, he walked into the Taliban camp, he got what he wanted, just leave him there?
I think that's a really difficult question, Leon, and I'm kind of ticked off that you asked me it. I don't know. I think that
just do what Bill does and answer whatever question you want to answer, and disregard the question that I asked.
I'll say that I'm actually, being a cold-hearted, evil libertarian, I'm kind of inclined to say no. You deserted, and that's that. It's hard for me to have a ton of sympathy, particularly given the number of American soldiers that went after him and lost their lives trying to get him back. That said, I will pull a bill and shift a bit. I think one of the most interesting things I read about this is how really this was a cynical and kind of brilliant move by Obama here, by using Bergdahl potentially to unload 5 Gitmo guys that he wanted to unload, and thus if you want to be kind of the Machiavellian cynic, you can think of it in that way, and in that way it was a slam dunk for him. He was able to preen a bit in the Rose Garden, act like this great guy, and unload guys that he didn't want to be in control of anyway. And in that way, it's a big win.
Bill Jen Psaki went on Megyn Kelly today and said essentially that, basically strongly backing up what the administration did initially with these prisoners. She said, even in retrospect, even given all that we know now, it was absolutely worth it to trade 5 high-value prisoners for Bergdahl. Why can't the Obama administration admit a mistake on this one? Why can't they say, look, maybe we didn't know all the facts? I mean, is there any wiggle room at this point for them to turn around and essentially admit that they got a bad deal out of this?
No. When has this administration ever admitted that? I'm pretty sure that Barack Obama, the only thing he's ever admitted he made a mistake on is gay marriage. That's about it. They have... they have a set position. They did it. They will defend it at all costs. And Leon, I think you were actually selling yourself short before when you were talking about your piece. I absolutely loved your piece, and I think my favorite quote from the entire piece was here you go. I got it block quoted right here. Was, "You could feel it in the sold-out ballpark, where fans piled on top of one another in the left field corner just to get close to Matt Harvey as he warmed up before the game. And you could feel it in the clubhouse afterward, where pitching coach Dan Worthen talked about the goosebumps we all felt when Harvey took the mound and dominated it as if he'd never been gone." I think you were spot on in that write-up, Leon, I'm sorry. And I really love your stuff since you've come back to the Matt Harvey beat. And yeah, just my hat's off to you for that beautiful prose. It's just lyrical and touching, loved it.
I'm sure he'll be even better after his second Tommy John surgery, which will be due sometime in July of this year. Jeff, one thing that the White House has refused to answer, or at least been cagey on, is what Obama personally knew about the allegation, not the Pentagon, not the Secretary of Defense, but what President Obama, he himself personally knew about the allegations that Bergdahl was a deserter at the time he made the decision to okay the release. Should that have made a difference in the President's decision, or should we have just tried to get him back regardless as a U.S. troop on principle?
No, it should have made a difference. I mean, it's kind of a compound question that you just asked there, okay? So what did the President know? Obviously, not having been in the room, I can't say for certain. There's always that epistemological doubt. But knowing actually more than the average bear about what a president knows in these sorts of situations, I can tell you right now, I'll bet dollars to donuts, the president knew all the relevant circumstances. He had people advising him about this. I think that the failure there, at least the failure as they would characterize it, was a failure of political calculation. They knew these things. They thought these things would be glossed over. They were genuinely taken aback, taken by surprise by the reaction and the willingness of other people who served with Bergdahl and his platoon to immediately come forth and say, this man was a deserter. This man was no hero. This man, caused, was it 5 or 6 American soldiers to get killed in the search room, and any number of other ones who actually got, very critically wounded. That was a surprise to them. Obama knew about it. Now, if you ask me, should we just have this, get our man back at any cost? No, I don't. And I feel reluctant to say that because I am not an enlisted man. I've never served. But I know enough of these people, and I know the general code. And the understanding is that, yes, you want to get these people back. That's why you send out rescue missions to do so. But you're not going to give up any shit that you have on your side at any price to get any random person back, particularly somebody who wasn't just a valorous soldier captured on the field of battle, but a man who actually deserted his unit, walked off in the middle of a war zone and got captured. So no, on a philosophical level, I find that argument to be ridiculous. It's falderall. It's talking points. But I think that the real point, and Scott made this well. Again, Scott and I, we agree with each other so much because we're blood brothers. The real impulse here is
No.
that Obama wanted an impulse. He wanted any excuse that he could get to empty out Guantanamo Bay, and this was as good a reason as any. And it gave him a reason to unburden himself of 5 otherwise very troublesome, high-ranking Taliban leaders, and that was the real pretext that was used to justify these actions.
All right, let's move on and close off with some Capitol Hill news, and we're going to go back to Kemberlee again, make up for lost screen time in the beginning of the program. The House, against all expectations, has come together with only 17 defections to pass the Republican budget, and I use scare quotes for, I think, rather obvious reasons. It is a budget that repeals Obamacare, of course, and balances the budget in 10 years. It was, if nothing else, a rare win for the leadership team in terms of not having 150 defections on the Republican side. Look, obviously, this is DOA as an actual budget. It's never going to get through the Senate, and if it does, it'll get vetoed. The question is, how is it going to play politically? I mean, is it going to be subject to the same kind of attacks as the Ryan budget had, and will it be essentially a net drag on the Republican candidate for president in 2016?
I think it's too early to determine whether or not it's going to affect whoever the presumptive nominee is, particularly because right now we only have one individual who's technically running for president at this point. But in terms of the political ramifications of it, I don't know that it's going to be any different than any of the other budget battles that we've seen. Anytime we try to cut anything, reappropriate anything, we get the same song and dance from Democrats over and over again. I think, if anything, I'm curious to see how, after the Department of Homeland Security funding debacle, I'm curious to see how Senate Republicans will handle this bill and what concessions they'll make, what, if anything, they'll do to actually get a vote on this budget. So I'm more curious from a leadership tactical standpoint as to how this is going to play out than I am what the long-term ramifications might be. Because ultimately I think how this is handled is going to dictate really what we're going to see for the next 2 years.
So Kemberlee, if you had to guess, there's going to be probably at least 3 members of the Republican Senate who are going to run for president. Of course, we know Ted Cruz. Probably also we're going to add Marco Rubio and Rand Paul to that pile at least. If you had to guess how all 3 of those guys are going to vote on the Republican budget, what would be your guess as to how all 3 of those individually are going to vote?
If I'm guessing that Rand Paul is going to say no because something, budget something, this is funding war, I don't know. If I'm guessing on Rubio, I think he's going to pass it. I think Cruz might reluctantly, with caveats, pass it. But I think he also needs something at this point to detract from the criticism that he hasn't done anything and he hasn't accomplished anything. So I think we would have 2 voting for it, 1 voting against it, that 1 being Rand Paul.
All right, Neal, we're going to go to you next. In terms of things that actually have a chance of being done, which will remove the House Republican budget from that consideration, in terms of things that actually have a chance of occurring, it looks like the Senate and the House are kind of working together to kill the sequester for good.
Okay.
Which, in my humble opinion, and Scott will probably join me on this one, is one of the very few good things that the House-controlled GOP actually accomplished during their tenure as the one-chamber majority that they had between 2010 and 2014. And so as we watch these kind of paltry cuts that we managed to carve out of the budget go up in flames, I guess the question that not only I, but a lot of conservatives who worked and scraped to get these people elected to the House and Senate are asking themselves is, when are conservatives going to see some benefit from the GOP controlling the House and the Senate?
Right. And I've said this on the program before, before we took control of Congress, I was, very skeptical of fruitless efforts, sometimes led by Senator Ted Cruz, to make these grand promises that they could never deliver upon. But now that we actually control both houses of Congress, it seems completely odd to me that they are unwilling to take a stand on some of these issues. to make the Democrats vote against something that might be popular that President Obama definitely doesn't want to pass. Why not use their position to make the Democrats sweat a little? This is the thing I've never understood. And maybe I guess I was a sucker for thinking maybe they would actually use their majority to stick it to the president just a little bit. But yeah, it is. It's mystifying to me.
So you have nothing to say in defense of your favorite politician in all of Washington D.C., John Boehner?
No, I actually don't. I mean, like I said, I gave them the benefit of the doubt until they controlled Congress. But now that they actually control the Congress, it's like, do your jobs. We put you there for a reason, so go ahead and do it. Be dicks. Try it. See what happens. I mean, what do they lose by actually trying? I mean, they can't have much worse results.
I agree. And if I could, one thing that I would add to that too is that up until the DHS funding fiasco, which really soured me on the whole of the GOP congressional leadership, I recognize the difficult position that they're in. They have a very limited majority in the lesser house. There's very little that they can do. I do not understand for the life of me why we keep getting outmaneuvered, why we keep getting duped by the likes of the Reids and the Pelosi's. At this point, I really don't think there's an excuse. Yeah, we have a guy in the White House who's threatening veto for everything he doesn't like. That's something to contend with. But I think were a PR campaign or messaging consistent to curb that to some degree. But that I would rather the debate be, why is the president vetoing this bill that we've passed, rather than, well, he's going to veto it anyway, so why are we even bothering?
Absolutely. That's not the point. It would be nice to take this out of the realm of speculation and say, well, yeah, actually the president did veto that bill that we passed that has, that polls pretty well among Americans. So, that's...
Let him veto. Let him be the asshole that vetoes it.
Exactly. And that's something that our presidential candidates going into 2016, whoever they may be, can use. They can say, as I was a member of the Senate and we sent this bill to President Obama and he vetoed it. What does that tell you? What does that tell you about what the Democrats value? Not you. But our GOP leadership is not doing that. I mean, this seems, maybe they think it's too obvious. I just don't get it.
It wouldn't be sporting of us.
Yeah, let's.
It'd be like hunting cows. It's too easy. We must find something more difficult.
There's a time to be sporting, and then there's a time to just be a dick.
So speaking of things that are tremendously popular that the GOP could get behind, Scott, one of the issues that's a live issue in the Senate in particular right now is the Hyde Amendment. And one of the things that's tremendously unpopular is taxpayer funding of abortion. It is one of the most unpopular positions in the American political discourse that has any kind of traction within any political party. And I wrote a post on this at Red State over the weekend. Consistently, this has been polled for decades. Support for taxpayer funding of abortion polls consistently between 20 and 30% of the American electorate. That is less than the number of people who believe the U.S. government was involved in 9/11. That is less than the number of people who believe that interracial marriage should be illegal. That's about roughly the same percent, about 20 to 25%. That is less than the number of all kinds of just horribly extremist positions. And here the Democrats appear ready to essentially hold up the entire business of the Senate. They've now held up the human trafficking bill. They're threatening to hold up the doc fix, which we'll talk more about in a second, including the Loretta Lynch nomination, all kinds of things over basically eliminating the Hyde Amendment. Will the Republicans also punt on this one, or is this something they're willing to say, look, if you guys want to shut down the business of the whole Senate, we'll just sit here until you guys agree to a bill that has the Hyde Amendment on it?
Yeah, I think there's no chance they're willing to do that. I think the last 3 months have taught us that the Republican leadership is deathly afraid of being blamed, particularly by the media, for any sort of problems with the Senate or problems with our legislative process. They truly believe that whatever they do, whatever issue there is, is going to be blamed on them, and the dysfunction of the Congress will be blamed on those dastardly Republicans. Previously it was when Harry Reid had a Senate majority. Now Harry Reid has a Senate minority. It really doesn't matter, and so I don't think there's any chance that they have any sort of backbone when it comes to the Hyde Amendment or anything else. And let me just add, I think that the last few months, and particularly the last few weeks, on defense spending and sequestration and the budget and so forth, and the SGR, the doc fix thing that just happened today, they've just shown us quite simply that the Republican Party, at least most of the guys in Congress, has absolutely no interest in actually cutting spending. They really don't care a lot about cutting spending. They don't mind tweaking things on the margins, and they certainly would prefer tax cuts to tax hikes. But when it comes down to doing the difficult business of actual spending cuts, they would prefer that this all just kind of went away. And the last few weeks have demonstrated that. Hell, Rand Paul today, of all people, came out in favor of increased defense spending. And I know that was kind of a too clever by half tactical maneuver on his part, but it really just goes to show that this party of limited government, not so much.
So let me stay here with you, Scott. So on that exact same point, the CBO came out, and let's talk a little bit about the doc fix. Congressional Budget Office says the doc fix is going to add approximately $141 billion in deficit spending to the budget. Mm-hmm. However, John Boehner's defense to that is to say, look, if you go by our current tactic, which is we just kick this can down the road 6 months, a year at a time through these accounting fixes, it's going to cost way more than $141 billion. So you see, Republicans, I'm saving you money.
Right.
I mean, I guess is there value to holding the line on this particular fight politically to say, look, of all the things that we've caved on in terms of spending, is there any value at this point to say, look, we're just going to fight for doctors to be paid less at the end of the day?
Yeah. No, and I agree with. So U of L Levin had a very long, very wonky piece in National Review today, and while I tend to disagree with him on some of the more technocratic aspects of conservative fiscal policy, I think he was dead on with this one, and that was that, look, on whole, this thing is a giant stink burger. This being the SGR, the doc fix bill that went through today, that the claims about the bill's fiscal conservativeness or fiscal conservatism are a joke. That it's really talking. They've defined competence down so far that this is just merely a one gradient better than the total incompetence that we're used to. But at the end of the day, even though that there are fiscal problems, even though there's some fundamental problems with kind of what the reforms do, and they're not very conservative in that regard too. At the end of the day, it's not the hill to die on. This is not the litmus test issue. I would argue that there are a lot of other things that have happened and that are going to happen that are a lot more important than doc fix. And so in that regard, this is one that it's you kind of shrug your shoulders and cite it as yet more evidence of the Republican Party's problem, but you certainly don't make this some sort of grand last stand.
So, Bill, I mean, how do you see the Hyde Amendment fight playing out? I mean, do you agree that it's basically a done deal? Do you think that has any chance of killing the doc fix, as they appear to be kind of tied together now? Or do you think that basically the GOP Senate is going to cave in spite of the fact that taxpayer funding for abortion is a very unpopular policy?
Oh, of course they're going to cave because they don't actually care about social conservatives. And when they lose and we can...
Yeah, but this is not a 20-week abortion ban. This is a fastball right down the middle.
Yeah, and so was the trafficking bill, and yet we allowed that to get killed with nary a peep, and we're going to come back, and instead of fighting for this and being willing to die on this field, die on this hill, we're going to do what Democrats do. I'm sorry, we're going to do the opposite of what Democrats do, which is actually stand for these principles, and we're going to cave. I actually think the best thing that was written on this subject was by Joy over here. Joy wrote this great piece for Ace of Spades, and he said Matt Harvey was back throwing 99-mile-per-hour fastballs, and suddenly anything seemed possible. Yes, with a mere 2 innings and 25 pitches, Harvey added to his aura as not only the Mets ace, but some baseball superhero. The Dark Knight Rises. And I have to think that that is going to be the defining aspect of this Congress.
Ladies and gentlemen, an historic moment here on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends. The last time Bill McMorris is ever called upon to answer a question on this program. He will continue to be a panelist. His mic will be forcibly muted from now in perpetuity. So Kemberlee, let's go back to you and close off the discussion with this. In terms of everything that we've been discussing here, and again, over the last few weeks in this program, we've talked about the way that the Republicans have caved on the DHS funding battle. They caved on this doc fix, which is going to cost billions and billions of dollars. They almost definitely will cave on the Export-Import Bank, which is easily capable of not only being demagogue, but accurately described as a slush fund for connected friends of Congress. And yet, of all things, Elizabeth Warren brings a bill to the Senate floor that essentially says we should allow people who have student loans to refinance at last year's lower rates. And now the Republicans stand up and say, aha, here you have pushed us, but no further. We will not allow this to go forward. I mean, again, given all the rest that's gone on, is this a good fight for the Republicans to fix? I mean, at this point, will anyone take them seriously that they're standing on principle here?
Well, while I agree in principle that we obviously shouldn't pass that, it's such a stupid fight to have. I mean, with everything else that we could be doing, whether it's the Hyde Amendment, whether it's dealing with actual budget cuts, this seems like the dumbest, least concerning thing, particularly in terms of the base. Who cares about this? I mean, if you're looking at what people want the GOP to fight about, and all of the test data and all of the polling that I've seen in any state, student loan rates is not on that list. I understand maybe looking down the road to 2016 and GOP being traditionally horrible with getting the youth vote, that might be a consideration. I don't know if that's what they're thinking. But I feel like, number one, this is a really stupid place to plant your flag and say, no more, of all places. And I have no reason to believe at this point that they're not going to cave on this like they have everything else. As much as I hate to admit it, I think that is the reality.
All right, folks, well, we're running out of time here, so I want to wrap up our program, and thank you all very much for joining us. I want to take a minute to thank my regular panel of co-hosts for taking time out of their Thursday evening and join us. Scott Lincicome of the Cato Institute, thank you for being here. Neal Doing of the Federalist. Jeff Blehar of Ace of Spades Decision Desk. F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon. We're sort of glad to have you here. I want to say thanks also to Caleb Howe, who's filling in for Aaron Gardner, couldn't produce for us tonight. For the first time, we've had a guest producer on the show, and the show started in a reasonably timely fashion and ran without significant technical glitches. Thank you very much, Caleb. Appreciate your help. And also thanks to our guest panelist, Kemberlee Kaye, contributing editor for Legal Insurrection. I've been Leon Wolf, your host. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends.
Go West Virginia! West Virginia!